Hello, and welcome to this episode of Rule of Carnage, a series of conversations, chats, interactions between myself, Glenn Ford, a game designer and developer, and my good chum, Mike Hutchinson, also game designer and developer.
Yes.
In our series of game designs between Pukeapocalypse and Gaslands and Space Skits, I think people might say that we've put together some games with very strong vibes to them, very
Hmm.
strong feelings, insinuations of what the game might be and might offer. And then I think equally sometimes we've created games that have a much looser, more open vibe. And people talk a
Or
lot,
yeah, or you might even say an unsuccessful.
or possibly sometimes a sort of like take it or leave it vibe. So like, people talk a lot about the vibes of a game. The things other than maybe the mechanics and the rules and the crunchy munchy experience of playing that are going to hook people in, draw people to the game, getting taking a second look at it. And so we're going to have like a bit of a chat, a bit of a noodle on what vibes are for a game, how you can produce them for your game, where they come across to your players, and how maybe they pin through into some of the sort of the deeper layers of the game. So I think like as I was talking there, what I was thinking of as an example of the various tiers is I think there's like I think Space Skits and Pukeapocalypse have quite a strong vibe, quite a strong feel to the game, and I think that the those games would be very difficult to like reskin. You know, there's not many ways a lot of the parts would make sense without those particular vibes on them. Then there's like Hobgoblin, which has a very strong like world building around it in a narrative, but you could pretty easily pull that right off and like plop something else on top of it, and the game would chunter along just fine and dandy. And then there's possibly something like A Billion Suns is maybe a place where those vibes didn't really hit people sort of either way. And I think maybe reconsidering the vibes of A Billion Suns might be a place where you're sort of at the moment, uh, generally in your designing, Mike.
Yeah, so I guess like from my perspective, we were having a conversation about onboarding and how to like get your players, get prospective players to play both their first game and ideally their second game. And at the end of that conversation, I was sort of pointing to the fact that there's a front cover to your game which is going to attract people or turn them away from that first game or even picking up the game to potentially explore what it is. And I think that for me sort of like iconically like the first place that whatever the vibe of your game kind of exists and begins to impress itself on potential players. And I think that what you've expressed there about like some games that we've made are difficult to separate from their theme and some are very easy to reskin. I think that's potentially on an axis that sits alongside another axis which is sort of about the strength of the like it's sort of the strength of the marketing assets around it, but like the strength of the taste, the flavor that is inherent in the package. Because I think that one thing that initially is true about Hobgoblin, while it's true that it's quite easy to reskin, it comes across with quite a strong vibe initially. Like the artwork's very strong, the logo is very specific, and it says things to prospective players about like who this game is written by and who maybe it's written for and like what communities it might be adjacent to and what sort of feelings you're supposed to feel when you look at this.
Mm.
And I think that that's like when a game has a strong vibe, I think it like f- I think it, and I'm not certain about any of these things because I think this conversation is very much like an exploratory one. But I feel like a vibe is something that hooks into parts of your brain that either are wired or are missing to connect to other parts of culture. So I think that a vibe can connect with like a sub community of people or a kind of music or a sort of genre or a sort of like subgenre of, movies or books or something. And that it's useful to do that as a game maker because it connects your game and your conceit or your fantasy or something with some stuff in the outside world that then can help people get excited because it's adjacent to something that they're already excited about.
I mean, I think my feeling on this is like, yeah, hopefully, sort of, hopefully the vibes communicate something about the open about the sort of experience that is going to be offered by like interacting with the game and the community around the game, and suggest a sort of the social aspects of play and where they should be at. Like I think, for example, for me, Infinity, as soon as I sort of look at the sort of the vibes of Infinity, I'm already assuming it's going to be as sort of crunchy and hardcore a competitive experience as Infinity turns out to be. I don't know how much of that is like sort of understanding around it, but something about the hard edge cyberpunk feel about it to me sort of always spoke of there's probably going to be sort of detailed tech elements going on here. Makes me think a little bit of like Netrunner, which I always think of being as a sort of quite a crunchy game. And it's sort of, so for me, like the vibes of Infinity filter through into what it will be like to interact with another Infinity player whilst playing Infinity, and the sort of attitude I should probably adopt. Where I shouldn't probably come to Infinity with a sort of loosey goosey attitude of, yeah, there or thereabouts will probably do in the measurements. And I think for me that's like a really strong like through line of what a good vibe and a well presented vibe can do for a game. It can make like the social experience, the coming to the table with a stranger, like so much easier because you're sort of in the same world. And I think it's like one of the things that's interesting, like Hobgoblin is presented with a very sort of like metal edge to it, which I think sort of opens up an implication that maybe like miniatures agnosticism and a bit of like, throwing things together a bit more. I mean, it's part of why punk is very much the influence for Pukeapocalypse, because
Mm-hmm.
it's very much like, no, I want you to smash things up and mess around with your miniatures and have that sort of feel to it. And I want you to all come to the table with that assumed sort of social circle of, you know, close enough is absolutely fine. We don't, and I think like, and this is in way of a roundabout thing of getting to the thing that, that always seems odd to me is a lot of people talk about Warhammer 40k as being a game with amazing vibes and an amazing sort of feel to it, and sometimes being all about the vibes. And for me, the vibes of that game and the nature of playing that game and the actual mechanics and details to it have always felt, I don't know, they've never quite come together in a sort of coherent whole for me. And so like thinking of that game as vibes led always seems weird to me when people say that. It always feels,
I think it's definitely true that, like, as we struggle to define what vibes might or might not be, like, you and I are very much in agreement that, like, there's plenty of games that are vibes first and then hollow behind that. And
mm,
that a successful game design, I think, in our opinion, is one that presents a really strong flavor and then carries that through and delivers on it in the gameplay as well. And so I think that's like, from a game design standpoint, that's what really excites me is like, I haven't been that good in the past about, or that conscious about working on how strong the smell of my game is from like 50 yards. but rather focusing on the actual gameplay experience. And I think that as I've gotten more confident designing good gameplay experiences, I've had a sort of opportunity to stand back and go, I'm not sure my games stink enough. Like they need to smell more strongly of something so that people can come at them with a bit of a stronger sense of what they're going to get.
Mm,
And like A Billion Suns is absolutely a shining example of, like, it's partly Offspray's fault, right? Like they produced very, they produced very mediocre illustrations at a tight timeline because we had some problems with the delivery. But like it's also an Offspray Blue Book, and Offspray Blue Books are kind of deliberately, sanitized and smellless.
mm,
And so that game doesn't really say anything on the outside of the book about what the hell is on the inside. And
mm,
then I didn't, at the beginning of the book, like there's some attempts at selling in the sort of corporate warfare stuff in the opening fluff, but like it doesn't hit very hard, and the little spaceships that I painted and the way that I laid them out are very shit, honestly. And
mm,
so like that game doesn't say anything to you until you start playing it, and then after the first or second game it will start telling you things and whispering things in your ear.
mm,
But like a game like Merkborg is screaming at the top of its lungs from the very front cover. Like, does it then deliver on the gameplay? I don't think it does, but it's very, very loud and smells to high heaven. You can smell it across the convention hall. So
mm.
I think that my main point with this conversation is trying to figure out like how to get better at vibes without losing track of connecting them to the game.
Yeah.
um and I still think that like I'm still trying to figure out what it is, what are the components, what are the stink components of vibes that makes it something that I can more predictably lock into. And
Mm,
what I'm saying there about connecting to things that exist already in the world, like the vibe of um Gaslands is like connected very easily and obviously to like what is it that I feel like when I'm watching a Mad Max film? Like what is it that I feel like when I look at the car combat in Mad Max? Like what is the, there's oranges and there's rubber everywhere, and like that kind of stuff needs to come across, you know, in the artwork, and it needs to come across in the miniatures that are being shared online for it, and it needs to sort of, you know, I mean, yeah. I was going to
I,
say, like, even the name needs to like be part of evoking this.
yeah, I think ideally, yeah. I think the thing for me about like Gaslands and Space Skits and Pukeapocalypse, is that to my mind they have a certain sort of irreverent joyfulness that that A Billion Suns and Hobgoblin and Boards and Black Flags don't necessarily have. And
But
that's
that doesn't make them more vibey, though, does it? That just changes the vibe.
I think like things that you can shout at people are easier to like communicate in a
Yeah,
vibe,
yeah, okay, no, that's fair. That's
you know.
fair. So the subtler your vibe, the more difficult it's going to be heard or be
Yeah,
smelt
like
in the
I think
convention center.
yeah, I think like certainly Gasland
Hmm.
has that sort of Mad Max feel to it, but it also has that sort of couch competitive video game thing to it. It has a lot of like Mario Kart style
Right.
inspiration. When we're
Yeah.
designing, it's always like you know the fact that you don't die, you can respawn. No one's like fully eliminated. It should be funny when you like flip off the track and blow up, and you should
Yeah.
be laughing as hard as everybody else. You know, those are the sorts of things that are inspired by games where everybody is in the same room shouting at each other while they're playing, and you're jostling. You know, it's an inspiration where you're like playing Mario Kart and you elbow the other person to like it's that sort of feel to it. Whereas you know, A Billion Suns and you know, like you know, Hobgoblin, etc., are much more driven by a sort of like you know a chess like consideration of the fine wine of a like game that you're experiencing. And like you know, A Billion Suns in its best moments is when both of you sort of sit there quietly contemplating a thing and then look at each other and understand that you both understand the myriad complexities of what's going on. And that's like a very fine.
But that could have been like, if that is the joyful moment, then that there must be a way of communicating that in a way that's more immediate and vibey. You know, it's that I didn't have the right image of, like, you know, of a powerful interstellar general like making the final button push to eliminate the, you know, the enemy species or whatever.
No, yeah, totally. I do think there's a way of communicating. I sort of picture those sort of like, funny enough, because like with the Space Skits Kickstarter video, you did that sort of 90s toy commercial feel to it. It
Hmm.
makes me think of those other sort of toy commercials for certain board games in my youth, which were like bearded men sitting around playing a kid's like board game and considering it like it was sort of
Mm.
nine-dimensional hyper chess, and they went nah ha ha, and the other one going Gah! And it's that for me, A Billion Suns would need that sort of little like advert clip of like two people obviously very sophisticated and engaged and intelligent, like interacting. But all that.
So I look where I think maybe that points us is that, like, in order to like figure out the how do you make vibe happen? So I've said that I think it is something about connecting to things that people already know about. I think the second thing here that comes out of this discussion is like, you've got to have a really strong conceit. Like
Mm,
we've talked about this before anyway. Like, you've got, like, to have a good game, I think you have to have a very clear, strong conceit for the game. Like, who am I? What am I doing? You know,
mm,
you've also got to have a clear conflict, but like the clarity of the conceit allows you to like find something to put the vibe around. Like
mm,
the conceit, like, if like we're barbarians, it's like, okay, great, now I've got to figure out like where do barbarians live in other people's imagination already and connect them with those things. Or like, you know, we're throwing up on each other, okay, like what places can I imagine that strong conceit of, like, you know, we're all doomed and we're just going to hell and throwing up on each other, like what things can I connect? So I think if your game lacks a strong conceit, it's going to be almost impossible to connect a vibe to it. But even as I
mm,
say that out loud, like, so one of my, I don't love criticizing other games severely on this channel, but like one of my bugbears is I was trying to figure out why Troika exists, which is a role-playing game made by some lovely people here in the UK. But like, it's part of the OSR. And I was trying to like, I finally picked up a copy of it. And I was trying to figure out like, why is it a game? Like, what does it do that makes it what it is? And the thing that it is trying to be is a science fantasy game.
mm.
And how it achieves that is by saying it's a science fantasy game and then putting a cool science fantasy picture on the front. And then it just has like a straight up kind of OSR, you know, OD&D sort of rule system that doesn't integrate with that at all. I haven't looked at the adventures. Presumably the adventures are where like this rubber hits the road on turning this promise of a science fantasy, like a gonzo science fantasy game into a thing. But that for me was an example of where like there's nothing connecting that mechanically to where it's sort of saying it on the tin. I feel like there
Mm.
was a point I was getting towards here, but I've just ended up in a mild troika rant.
So for like for people who haven't necessarily heard us like use the term before, what we mean by a conceit for your game is like, um there's good some point the player's going to ask the question, okay, who am I? And what you're not going to say is, well, a dude stood next to a table playing a game of toy soldiers. The answer you're going to give them to that question is the conceit of your game.
That's right.
The lies you tell about the things that are around you to convert various bits and pieces into your gamic world are the conceits of that game. You are a general, you are a punk, you are a
Mm.
superhero. This block represents a precious resource, and this token is your fear of.
Yeah, and so where I was going was I was trying to figure out, do you have to have a strong conceit to have a strong vibe? And I think that Troika sort of disproves that for me, because you can have something like um there's a whole cluster of these sort of OSR flavor first games, whether it's Into the Odd, Troika, Merkborg, like they don't actually say who you are inside the game. They don't come at you with knives and say like you are a, penniless merchant trying to travel from one place to another, and all the problems that you're going to encounter are penniless merchants in science fantasy. They just say science fantasy, go, like be whatever you like, roll up a character, like in the way that Dungeons and Dragons sort of says like there's a world and it has dungeons and or dragons, like roll up for your character and we'll figure out who you are. But even that, like that's got a really strong now conceit baked in, because it's like, well, what are we playing? Well, we're playing, adventure classes. Well, I know exactly what that is. And maybe what's missing is that these games are just hooking into that and I hadn't spotted it, and so you're just supposed to play a thief in science fantasy land. So you can have a strong vibe without a strong conceit. So that can't be one of the key components of the. So is it just the artwork? Is it just saying things really loudly?
I think you can have a strong sort of vibe without a strong conceit. But I do think that when that happens is, I don't know, and this is for me personally, is when I end up finding the game experience hollow once I start sort of examining it. And
Completely taken as read, but I'm just trying to figure out how you create the vibe in the first place.
I
And
mean,
maybe it's like maybe it's a conceptual, maybe it's a concept, like maybe it's a conceptual force of will, in so much as you get a strong idea in your heart of like what this game smells like, and then you channel every decision through that, and you try really hard to make every decision contribute to that. And maybe you fail on one aspect or another because you're not very familiar. Like, I didn't have any control over the artwork really for Gaslands, and the artwork's good. It's fine. Like David Nash that did the artwork, it did exceptionally good pieces. But like, I don't like the overall look of Gaslands. It doesn't have a consistent theme. It's not like coherent. Like, when Space Gits comes out and you look at that book, you'll know what I mean when I say like a consistent and exciting theme. Like Gaslands doesn't have it, but Gaslands has got a theme, but it doesn't come out of the artwork. Whereas like Troika has a really strong vibe, but it's not coming out of the conceit, but it is definitely coming out of the art direction. And so maybe the point is you hold something dearly in your heart, and then you try and focus your decisions, your design decisions, your art direction decisions, your product design decisions through that. Because I think with Pukeapocalypse, like you got such a clear smell in your nose at the start of that like it just was really easy for you to write the words that matched that, or make the diagrams in a way that matched that, or like.
yeah, I think like having, I think confidence is a lot of it, and like confidence in the thing that you are doing, and having the freedom to do it. I think like the big thing for the apocalypse is that Exalted Funeral totally gave me the freedom to,
Right.
put swears on the first page, and like all the way through, that every single bit of that book has that same voice to it, and I knew exactly what the voice was.
Hmm.
It was, things that I had grown up with and had like informed, so much of my childhood, that it was there and it was waiting. It was, like bits of 2000 AD and Tromaville and all that sort of stuff. And so I knew it everywhere. And what was great is that the artists knew it and the layout guide knew it, and everybody knew what it had to be. Whereas I think like to a degree, Gaslands is written from the voice of, sometimes this is an Osprey book about playing Gaslands rather
Yeah,
than,
yeah, yeah.
you know,
Well, and I love confidence as a way of like vibes emerge from confidence. I think there's really something there, because like for Gaslands, I wasn't confident as a writer and as a communicator of the games. I was confident that the game was fun, but I wasn't confident on how to communicate it. And so the way that it's written is very Mike 10 years ago. But also, like quite specifically, I was really clear it was a racing game, and Offspray didn't really want it to be a racing game, so it didn't confidently state like it. For me it was a really big moment when Offspray commissioned the new artwork for Refueled, and they put like a car crossing a finish line at the on the front cover. Like that was a huge moment where like Osprey confidently put behind the fact that like, oh yeah, this is a game about racing cars. Because like at one point they told me to take the race scenario out because that wasn't what the game should be about. And so, you know, whether or not I was confident, like as a group of people working on a product together, we weren't collectively confident on what the game was, and that shows in the Blue Book version, insofar as like the art doesn't necessarily connect to everything. Although there is a guy celebrating with some champagne,
Yeah, but it's still a lot of the images in
quite
that.
tentative.
Yeah, I think a lot of the images in the Blue Book are more about car combat, and there's a sort of, well, it's a car combat game in which you do some racing, and it's like that was never really the actual heart of the game. And I think like Space Skits is a perfect example in relation to this, is because you've been your own boss for it, and
Mm,
you're X many games down the line. You know, you've been able to go in and reading through Space Skits. It has it at various points. You can measure whenever you like, but it's not going to fucking help you. Is one of those lines of just like, okay, well, this is somebody who's in their space now and is
mm.
sort of flexing into it. And I think this is one of the things, like coming back to a game that is gonna, I think, like loom large for a little while in relation to discussions about vibe and whatnot. It Trench Crusade.
Yeah.
Like when I read and I've only read the rules like for when they were sort of in beta or whatever. When I read the rules for Trench Crusade, they felt to me like rules written by somebody who had looked at somebody else's like world building, etc., and vibes and creation, and gone, yeah, I will do you a job in that world, rather than somebody who was like, this is my world and it belongs to me and I am creating it, which is exactly sort of what Trench Crusade is. There's this one guy who has created the actual vibe of this world, and then a bunch of other people who have had to have that communicated to them, and they are the people building the actual game that vibe is going to be sort of structured around. And to me, I find that an odd way of it. I find it an odd way because it is an odd way of like.
Well, it isn't. It isn't. I mean, like,
Uh,
so like the way that that makes me think is about like film directors, auteur directors. So like you've got complicated big productions of stuff, and in the case of Trench Crusade it's like a very large selection of models and artwork and rules and community management and all this stuff. And so you've got to get a team of creative people to all sort of sing from the same hymn sheet. And I think that like the strength of the vibe from that game definitely oozes out of the consistency of the artwork, but also like the consistency of the sort of like over the top heavy metal album artwork, like backgrounds to the different factions and stuff. Like it is all like, you know, it's deliberately satanic panic sort of stuff, and that's good, and I'm here for it. And then I think that like it's easier when you're making space kits to like um to be able to sort of sit at so okay let me make a comparison then. So like space kits, I think the rule book for space kits is going to look kind of its own thing, but like I'm having to filter that through Till's artwork and Tyler's photography, and in the same way that you had to filter um Pukeapocalypse through Tiger's artwork and what's his name's artwork,
Lucas, yeah.
Lucas's artwork, and and the layout wasn't done by you as well. So I think that like even on, and like let's not forget that like Trench Crusade is only like 7 or 8 people, so it's only like twice as big a production team as both of our like little
Hmm.
indie games. So I think that the consistent thing there is like how able to communicate the vibe are the people in the creative team, and how receptive are the people around them to hearing that vibe, like how well matched to that vibe are
Yeah,
they.
yeah. I don't mean like when I say it's odd. I don't mean like theoretically odd as so much as I don't know, like historically odd. I mean, as in there are not many cases, I would think, in miniatures game history where the artist hires the game designer, essentially. By and large, it's the game designer hires an artist. There's
Yeah,
the
that's interesting.
game designer has the idea, and then it gets an artist to draw a picture of the idea. Trench Crusade is just, factually rare, maybe rather than odd, in that what's happened here is like it's like a guy who's drawn the front cover for a book and then found a ghostwriter to write the book for them, rather than
Okay, so I'm gonna quibble. I'm gonna quibble. So, like, Brian Ansell makes miniatures, then designs game, but like then John Blanche arrives and games exist because of John Blanche. So I don't know. I think that in the indie space, it's common to find art. It's like more common to find game designers hiring artists, but it's not unknown to find artists who, like, you and I have both been approached by artists who've been like, I've got a thing, but I don't know how to make it into a thing, or like I've got a half cooked game, but I'd like it to be less underdone.
yeah, it's not sort of unknown. And I think, like, the fact of like referring to GW there, you know, GW is obviously a sort of, a rare thing within the world of miniatures gaming. It's a conglomerate. It's
Mm.
a corporation. And I think, like, rolling all the way back to the idea of like 40K being a very vibes driven game. And I think part of all of this has to do with like you as a designer, as a driver and a leader of the game, is that like whatever they try to do with the 40K vibe, to me it's always going to have the undertone of something coming from a corporation. And like whenever in either of us do something for the vibe of the game, it's going to feel like it's coming from an individual who is like an independent designer. And hopefully, in many ways, maybe if like GW had done A Billion Suns, the fact that it would always have sounded like a heartless corporation speaking to people might have made that vibe really like instantly come to life. But it's like, you know part of what's almost lucky about the world of 40K is that it is a sort of a dystopian universe in which the individuality of people is crushed under the wheels of an uncaring administration, which is brilliant given that like GW is the one now sort of running that sort of story world. But I think like, ideally you want to lean into who you are as an individual. I think particularly like for your first game, if you're an independent and if you're an independent planning to like self-publish, I think like leaning into who you are and what you love and the things you really understand as a person are a huge benefit to like building and structuring the vibe of your game.
I think
um
that sounds right to me. I like, as you say that, like, I don't believe, and I don't think you mean it to mean that like that means you can only make one kind of game, because obviously we've all got lots of different sort of influences and proclivities inside us. And
yeah,
like my next game isn't necessarily going to be a Space Gits wacko SpongeBob fest, but it
no,
will, ideally, if I can get it to do so, it will communicate something about me as an artist. And so I
yeah,
think that that confidence linked with that, like you say, like connecting to things that you understand, you have a feeling for, then that's going to be something that, like, those connections between what you're trying to put out there and what it is that you're drawing on, whether it's music or film or, other kinds of genres, um, then I think that you'll be able to communicate with the sort of enthusiasm and or subtlety and or the right beats and little, elements of it that will communicate really clearly to somebody else, like, this is a really heavy metal game, or this is a really, weird western genre thing, and we both know what we, what we collectively mean by that.
yeah. We all contain multitudes, and hopefully there is more than one thing you are passionate about in your life. If there is more than one thing that you are passionate about in your life, please swing down into the comments section below this video and tell us about where your passions run deepest and how you might be converting that into a game and why it will therefore result in beautiful and fulsome vibes and vibrations within those who might encounter your game.
Also, if you've got an alternative definition for like what the vibes of a game are and or how to create them, like shout at
Yeah,
us, because this is an emerging line of thought
yeah, this is
for the
this is
rule of carnage.
a very soft and mushy subject, and it needs to be properly categorized and defined.
I
And
want to categorize the scent molecules and be able to recreate them with science.
absolutely, ideally, I want to be a color scientist advancing into the world. Since you're down there in the comments section, you may as well hit the like and subscribe buttons because they're right there, and it's it click
Can't
click.
hurt.
All done, won't hurt. And then why not look at the links where there are places you can go across to our Discord and try to help us understand the nature of the vibes of a game. You can swing by our Patreons and support the channel directly. Or you can swing by various links to buy many of our games and support the channel semi indirectly, but be good people and buy our stuff. For now, though, I think from this episode of Rule of Carnage, it's going to be a thank you and goodbye. So thank you and goodbye. Bye-bye.
Goodbye. Goodbye. It's too hot here to live.
It's way too hot.